Hello everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
And this, unless I'm very much mistaken, is number 223 in Sounding the Shadows.
Well, if you think that's right, it probably is. I don't know. I don't know anything this week. I'm sure loads of people feel the same. All the things that are familiar and reasonable seem to be swirling out of focus, out of reason, really. I was going to use the word exploding, but I mean that's not the best word to use this week, really.
No. And a very sort of stark piece of verse from somebody who we've heard from before. I suppose whether it's the current international situation that's occurring, I don't know, but possibly many people would identify with it. I'll read you the first bit. I woke this morning and I heard a voice. It told me that today I must make a choice. I've been on the fence for much too long, feeling weak when I used to be strong, running in circles, lost and afraid, scared and confused at the mess I have made. Which is, as I said, it's a kind of simple expression of a very deep feeling of things turning into a storm around you. And we say this often, but it is the case that a lot of people are wondering where their foundation is, what is solid, what could be solid, how can you be safe? Is there such a thing as safety?
Well, I was interested, Adrian, because within the middle of this, and I mean, we could just talk on and on and on, couldn't we? It's not just what's happening in the Middle East, it's what's happening. You know, we hear about the ex-owner of Harrods who misused his power appallingly. It just doesn't seem to stop. That something to do with power, whether you want to hang on to being the head of a state or whether your feeling of power means that you can somehow stop seeing people as people and start doing quite appalling things. I don't know, but it does feel as though something has gone so fundamentally wrong. And that's why it was really interesting. In the middle of all this, we had a letter and he quoted a line that really hit me because I thought, it's such a little line, but I'm just going to read it. And then I guess what I did, I Googled it and found out who'd written it and why. And this is it. Our minds could be forged into citadels against the world's chaos. And this is the quote, be thine own palace or the world's thy jail. And first of all, my first reaction was, well, that is how it feels. The world, everything going on in the world feels as though it's imprisoning us into being unable to change, unable to do anything, unable to, just behind bars, really, with all our power taken away. But when I actually found out, and it was quite a shock, wasn't it? When we together found that actually this was written by John Donne. I
thought I knew John Donne's poetry, or quite a lot of it, but I don't remember reading that before. I expect other people have. Yeah.
Well, what I was reading when I looked it up, all about him and his belief that people are transformable, which for him meant that you can make a decision in the middle of the chaos you might find yourself in, whether it's something you feel is your fault or whether it's what's happening in the world. Our minds could be forged into citadels, not into. I mean, we're seeing people's minds fanatically turned into something horrific. But he's saying your mind could be turned into a citadel against the world's chaos.
And what do you think that might mean?
Well, I think it's talking about be thine own palace. In other words, furnish who you are with things of beauty, with things of strength, with things of honesty and truth.
Well, you probably have to start actually by saying that we have a very heavy bias in terms of media communication towards the most wretched things.
Yeah.
And I was thinking as you were saying that actually, we know a number of people, more than a number of people, a lot of people, who really are good people, who are very loving and caring and strong and the sort of people that make you feel good. But the problem with being bombarded with this stuff, and I mean, we're listening to it, so obviously we are inviting the bombardment.
Well, I know, and surely we should try to understand.
We ought to, but it's at the moment it's item after item after item of sort of depravity or death, or I mean, it's very bad for your diet.
Or absolutely calculated horror. Yeah.
If you have a diet of influences, it is bad for you to have too much of any one of them. And I think that certainly happens to me. I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm weakened by it, really. And then when I think about what actually means something to me and is important to me, and the people I've known and know, I think this has got a little bit out of kilter, but nevertheless it remains.
But it has to be a decision, doesn't it, all the time, to, you know, those words in the Bible, you know, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report.
That's right.
Think on these things. And there is something about furnishing your mind to be full of the good things. You know, I know we hear sometimes from people for whom that's being in the woods or being somewhere good and wholesome, hearing birds. I don't know, making because it's relevant to this week, but you know, making banana bread.
Banana bread has been a big feature of this week.
Well, it has been a big feature of this week because we've discovered how to make a really yummy vegan banana bread, and as one of our sons is vegan, that becomes particularly nice and wholesome. But it's wholesome, that's what I mean. If you're with a child and they're stirring and they're licking the spoon of some yummy cake mix, it's wholesome, it's real, it's truthful. And I suppose you could say it's childlike wonder, which it's almost impossible to hang on to at the moment when everything feels so far from wonder and beauty and things of good report.
Have you got that book there that years ago I wrote a book about a little girl who had to go to hospital and was very unhappy because her mummy and daddy had separated and life was very tough, and she's only little, and she's obviously turning to the people who, so others say, might be of help to her. So one of the people she turns to is God.
Well, and Father John, who talks to her about God.
Yeah, and perhaps she doesn't understand God, but she has a go at it called reaching out to him. This is a bit of one.
Well, I will just have to explain that she is on traction.
That's
so
right,
she is horizontal, or in her words, she is a horizontal attraction.
That's
at
correct,
the moment.
yes.
And she has broken her femur, which she thinks is a lemur, so she says she hopes to be A1 lemur-wise before too long.
That's right.
So that's where it starts from. And
Andromeda Veal is her name.
Andromeda Veal. And where she came from in your mind, I have no idea.
Nor have I.
Well, she starts by saying a friend of yours called Father John.
Dear God.
Oh, dear God, sorry. A friend of yours called Father John said it will be all right to write to you. As you know, being omniscient, I am a horizontal attraction at the moment. She then goes on to say that Father John has explained, or egg-splained, to her about Jesus and the cross and all. He says, I can be in it if I want. I want to be in it, God, but I'm afraid you will not be getting a very good deal. I was glad when Mother said she cried, because her mother is part of the Green and Common Women.
Yes.
And is very cool and hasn't really allowed Andromeda to be a little girl in many, many ways. Anyway, Father John said you would forgive anything. I do understand a bit about Jesus on that cross, because when Father John said about it, I said it was a bit like being stretched horizontal, like me, only up straight. He said it was. So I said, oh, so Jesus was really an attraction like me. And then Father John's eyes went all wet. And he said, yes, Andromeda, he was an attraction, just like you. And then Father John brought me a kaleidoscope. It's great, God. You look through this incy little hole, and there are all shining pieces making beautiful pattern. And Father John said I could be a little shining piece in the kaleidoscope that Jesus is. So next time you look through a little hole at your son Jesus, you'll know one of the shining pieces is Andromeda Veal, Ms.
It was so long ago that I can't believe it. That I think what I had hoped to do was just to, amusingly, hopefully, picture what would come out of a little girl in that position. But one of the things that's happened to us quite often over the years, I was thinking as you read that, was that a mother will bring her child in, a small child in, a really small child, and you can see the tension because she will always sit at the back, or a father sit at the back, and
ready to make an escape.
He or she is thinking, just keep quiet, just long enough for me to be here for a while.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it starts, the crying. And because we so understand that, we really do, we usually stop it and say, just don't go yet, because that is a masterclass in prayer. That is just wonderful, because what your child is doing is letting it out, how he or she feels about what's happening.
It's a psalm, if you like.
Yeah, it's a sort
of
psalm.
Because that's what the psalms were, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A good deal of venting of feeling.
People say, don't they, I slept like a baby. Well, that actually means you woke 3 times and wanted to be fed or cuddled. But no, that there's a purity in that. And one of the problems people have with something like prayer, there are so many ways in which one is taught to do that. One of the problems with it is that you are encouraged to think that God is here, present, absolutely near you, and all you have to do is speak straightforwardly and honestly. But it's very difficult, because with children, whatever you say to them, they believe, which is fine, but to be a bit selective, don't you? I remember...
What do you mean?
I remember once we were at a meeting with children, and the person leading the meeting said to the children, each one of you has a guardian angel who looks after you, and so you are safe. We were talking about safety, weren't we? Well, they're not, are they? At that same time in the news, a little girl had been abducted down in Sussex somewhere, and horrible things had happened.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of urge within the religious context to be positive about everything. And in fact,
and we do understand that for a child. We want, I suppose, we want them to feel happy and safe.
Yeah, I just don't want to tell lies to them.
No, but it's a very fine line sometimes, isn't it?
Well, keeping your mouth shut is a reasonable way to get around that, I would say. But
there is an honesty in children, and that I think is this. Therefore, they can be open to God in a way that maybe we lose, because we're editing even as we go along as to what is acceptable and isn't acceptable. And it's a tough one at the moment. We want to pray that God will sort out the world. And then part of us doesn't want to pray that because we can't see for the life of us how he could. And we forget Andromeda talked about him being omniscient, but it's hard to hang on to that, really. And that's why sometimes you have to come right back to what you can believe. And you wrote a prayer that has become my favourite prayer of all time, and I haven't got it in front of me, but just a little bit of it I'll try and remember, from a little girl called Sissy. And she really takes God on. And she says, God, I want to pray that my favourite lamb Binky will be with us all after we die. I think he will, because I have eaten him. So he is inside me like Jesus. Some bits of him are inside assorted other members of our family. But please will you put him back together when you get all the bits in? It'll be a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, but I know you can do it. Now that's fiction.
You remembered that by heart. Amazing.
That's fiction, but there is something there about truth.
Well, for adults it is difficult because so often you sit in a circle and it becomes prayer time. Right. I remember at one church we were at, we just started and the vicar said, it was the youth group, and he said, okay, well, we've had some fun and now we're going to pray. And suddenly it all kind of descends into a shadow world where there might be an expectation that you bleat out some words that don't really mean much to you, to a God you've never met.
And you narrow down your mind, don't you?
Yeah.
To a sort of little tiny fluty,
and what is the tone?
Thing.
What is the tone, you think?
Yes.
How do you speak to God?
Yes.
God, help me to find a way to speak to you.
Yeah.
To use your own voice.
Yeah.
And I'm always interested to ask people to be honest with me about how they deal with all that, about how they actually talk to God.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, one other thing parallelly along this week has been a much greater move into not allowing, it sounds far away, but into not allowing mobile phones in school, certainly in the UK. And that means that for 8 hours a day, not just that you've got it under your desk or your table or just urging, pretending you can go out to the toilet so you can check up on your social media, but that it isn't there. You haven't got it. And this child psychologist was talking about the fact that from birth up until your mid-20s, the brain ought to be expanding. But actually, what happens when you're constantly entertained, you're constantly on a phone or you're constantly checking things out, and we're all tempted to do it. But as a child, that means that you're actually funneling down your mind, which is a bit like you were saying about the youth group and prayer. Suddenly you're funneling things down into a way of looking at things. And you're forgetting all the other stuff, all the childlike amazement.
Or you just learn a way to do it that helps you survive socially, which is, it's really difficult. There are a couple of things that have been helpful, aren't there? One is that there is a verse in Malachi, isn't there? Malachi 3:16, I think. I don't think I know.
You know it.
Why do we always say I think? I know damn well it is. Malachi is the last book in the Old Testament. It's about some people who screwed up badly, taking their horrible lame animals to the altar and lighting false fire.
Which always reminds me, the lame animals always reminds me of a lot of the old harvest festival services where all the old mouldy old jam came out from the back of the larder. Because you want to be able to bring... Anyway, there we are.
So, I mean, basically the whole thing is God saying, I don't like garage flowers, don't bring me rubbish just to make me feel better. But there comes a point where everybody gets together to try and sort it out, and they're discussing what they can do to get things going right. And it just says God received their conversation as prayer. And one of the things that certainly we've discovered, talking to people or sometimes praying with them a bit or whatever, is to let the conversation be what we're laying out for God in some way, particularly with people who really have terrible problems with having to. I mean, I think we've mentioned before a man who suffers from Asperger's, who said, "I never go for prayer because I cannot pray out loud," and we had said you don't have to pray. And the other helpful thing,
but because he said it as it was, that's what that many people would echo that.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
but he tended to be pretty blunt in what he said. Hence, going back to, I know it's fiction, but Sissy's prayer, blunt, saying it how it is.
Well, that's right. And you've got to.
Well,
the other thing that has been very helpful is that bit in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus talks about prayer. You sometimes think people don't actually read the Bible. Perhaps they don't. Maybe they do. Where he says, when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and speak to your Father who sees what's done in secret, and he'll reward you. And then he says, don't babble on. No, I've never heard anyone preach about that, but the fact that people babble on. And there's so many forms of prayer, the crescendo prayers, and actually simply being there with someone, not straining or struggling, but allowing whatever happens in the silence or the not silence to happen.
And maybe that's exactly what we're talking about when we said, instead of closing down, opening up. Not forcing yourself to be mindfully aware, but just allowing yourself to open up. The idea that your mind can be transformed, the idea that your attitudes can be transformed, that this isn't a fixed point, that it is possible, even though everything feels so wretched, to be filled with a sense of awe and wonder and all the other things that go with being childlike, as opposed to this appalling childishness that seems to be dominating the world, where horrible booby traps can happen, like some spiteful schoolboy, or people can just smash other people up just because they want to, just because somebody else has done something they don't like. My goodness.
That original quote, though, that's very interesting in that respect, isn't it? What the big issue? What kind of safety do you want? If you want to be safe from the world, you will not be. If you want to be safe from unpleasant things happening to you, you won't be. If you want to remain, I don't quite know what the word is. If you want to retain your authenticity by being the sort of person you feel you should be and responding to others in that way, and perhaps within your citadel, it depends what you believe. Maybe trying to be with God, I don't know. It's certainly worth a try. I have to be honest. I talk to God all the time, an awful lot, and I'm glad I do. And I, at the moment, really don't mind much about how I do it or what I say. I think He can probably handle anything that I say.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to finish, but it would be great, wouldn't it, to hear if anybody else responds to that strange little line from John Donne, written so long ago.
Yeah.
Such a complex character, writes something so simple in the middle of it.
He was remarkable, yeah.
So it would be great to hear anything, really, because we love hearing from you.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you again next week.
Yes, we will. Goodbye. Bye-bye.